From the last video, we talked about quadrants. We talked about the equations of quadrants and what each quadrant represents. Now, this is very important in understanding reduction formula. Now, the first thing you need to understand about reduction formula is, as we know from the first quadrant, that theta is less than 90 degrees. Now, the goal of reduction formula is to make each quadrant, quadrant 2, quadrant 3, quadrant 4, and change them into quadrant 1. So we want to make 180 minus theta, 180 plus theta, 360 minus theta, and reduce them into theta. Now, it doesn't matter if you're working with sine, you're working with cos, you're working with tan. We want to change each and every one of these trig ratios into sine, cos, or tan theta. To change from the other quadrants into the first, we understand the trig ratio itself wouldn't change. However, the sign of the trig ratio could. What I mean by that is, whenever I'm changing from the second quadrant into the first quadrant, since we said the second quadrant sign is positive, it means that if I substitute sine 180 minus theta, it could automatically change into sine theta. However, if I make it cos 180 minus theta, because only sine is positive in the second quadrant, it means that this cos would be negative cos theta. The same thing is also true when I put in 180 minus theta. I expect my answer to be negative tan theta. If we try another example, let's say we try out sine 360 minus theta. From this here, we understand that 360 minus theta represents the fourth quadrant. And in the first quadrant, only cos is positive. So for that reason, we're still going to have sine theta, but we will have negative sine theta. It's the same thing that happens if I have tan. I would also have tan theta, but instead of me getting a positive answer, I will get a negative answer because cos is the only positive trig ratio in the fourth quadrant. Now that you have a better understanding of how reduction formula works, let us try out an example where you have to use reduction formula to simplify your question. Three cos 180 plus x times sine 360 minus x over sine 360 plus x times cos 180 minus x. Okay, so let's start simplifying. So looking at all this here, we understand that 180 plus x was in your third quadrant. And in the third quadrant, cos is negative. And that's why we see we have a negative there. And we see this here, 360 minus x is in your fourth quadrant. That's why we have negative sine x over here, because sine is negative in the fourth quadrant. We have down here 360 plus x. Now 360 plus x is in the first quadrant. So since this is in the first quadrant and sine is positive in the first quadrant, that's why we have a positive there. And this is 180 minus x. 180 minus x is in the second quadrant and cos is negative, right? Negative in the second quadrant. That's why we see a negative there. So all we just had to do here was multiply. And notice I have negative times negative. That's where we have this positive from. Then the rest becomes 3 cos x sine x. And down here, this is a positive, that's a negative. That's why I brought out that negative out there. Then all I just have to do is cross cancel. The cos can cancel the cos, the sine can cancel the sine, and all I'll be left with is negative 3. And that is the simplification of this particular question over here.